Hopefully you have some burning questions for either Kate or Sam at this point in time, and I will need to put my glasses on so I can see if you put your hand up, and I think there's a roving mic. Louisa.
For many of us, like for me, and I know for many, we've only ever worked in the community sector. How do we engage business?
There you go.
I think you just ask them. We've been astounded by just, I guess, the desire of business leaders to engage in this work, and we've actually got the remarkable problem of some very senior business leaders who are actually quite impatient to be involved in the work in terms of helping, really joining the governance group at a community level to provide those capacities around governance and project management and managing through complexity and setting goals and agendas and helping progress the work. And it's more a case of actually the community needing to be ready to take that engagement on board, because it's I think it's really about identifying who the leaders are in your community and approaching them. I think you'd be amazed at how open and willing they are to provide their time and support.
We at Western Sydney Community Forum have been doing some work around this space for quite some time. We had a partnership with UWS in doing a young man who was doing his PhD on developing a common language between the community sector and the corporate sector, because I think that's the integral starting point, that it's not expecting business to come to us on the sort of terms that we're used to working on, but really thinking about what the interest of business is and the heart of business that can benefit from the working together on something like the Stronger Families Alliance. And I think there's some good examples of how that's worked here.
Actually, can I add to that? Sorry, just reflecting on that too. The other observation actually is that I think it's very helpful to be extremely specific about how you want business to be involved. I think businesses are used to talking about specifics, and I think it's really helpful if you engage a member of the business community in your community to come on board and participate. It's just to be very clear about how you want them to be involved. Do you want them to provide coaching and capacity building for the governance structure, or do you want them to help teach people how to use data systems? Or, just think carefully about what your needs are and then approach people accordingly.
I just want to say too that my colleague over there, Eva Grenz, has been doing quite a lot of work around community and business in Parramatta, and also unpacking a toolkit that we've got about working with business in one-page sort of fact sheets that are available on our website. So if people want are genuine about wanting to do some of that work, and I'll talk about that a bit too more in my talk.
Any other questions that follow that theme before we move on to another question? Can I just ask one little one? I know I'm the convening, but cost-benefit analysis, where does that fit in?
That's a great question, and we're grappling with that in our project currently. Because again, that's really a blank sheet of paper in terms of the fact that we don't have a lot of cost-benefit analysis to draw on in an Australian context. There's some fabulous analysis that's been done. Ross, you may know I'm not speaking from an academic point of view, but certainly I don't have a great deal of knowledge on how we do that in Australia in terms of the economic analysis that's been done. So we're really working on that at the moment in terms of looking at how do we establish effectively a baseline of community health and wellbeing. And really where we've landed on this is it's not particularly scientific. What we're doing is looking at what are the outcomes for children and families in our communities versus the state average at this point in time, and what's the level of investment over and above universal services by state, federal, NGOs and philanthropy investors. What's the dollar value of support into that community, and what are the outcomes as a place to start. But I think there's a great deal of work to be done on this, and I think it'd be great to see people coming together to discuss how we do this and what's going to provide a compelling case for investment.
Their hand up at the back there. Thanks.
I just had a question around the role of local government in the research that you've been doing. Because obviously here in the Blue Mountains, We're hearing all sorts of good things. I'm wondering, in the research, are you teasing out the variables of who really needs to be involved? Like, obviously, school principals, I'm thinking. But I'm also wondering, in Australia, because we have that very localised tier of local government, is there any research showing how well things are going or the outcomes are impacted by the level of engagement or otherwise of local government?
Kate, have you?
It's on. Okay. We haven't actually looked into that specifically, but one of the processes of looking at when we talk about coalition process looking at the way in which the coalitions or the community collaboration sets itself up, in order to be able to achieve your action plan, part of that does involve looking at who's not at the table. So in order to be able to put together the entire set of mutually reinforcing activities to achieve the goal that you've set for yourself, sometimes it does involve saying, well, wait a minute, we need somebody else here, and perhaps that could be a local government department or whatever. But I know that's not specifically answering your question, but I think it is part of that process of examining coalition function or the quality of your coalition, the characteristics of your coalition.
Hello, I'm Kathy, and I work for New South Wales Health.
Kathy, could you hold the microphone?
Yeah, I work for New South Wales Health. I'm a child and family health nurse, and I'm sitting here listening to all this, and I'm very despondent. Department of Education have actually come to the party in regards to local schools being involved. I'm just wondering, how do you engage health? Because it's such a huge component.
Now, I can see everybody jumping for that one. But Kate, you did have your hand up first.
I think we were perhaps privileged in the fact that Ross mentioned before that he's never in his long career of setting up linkage projects had departments coming to him, and health was one of the departments that came to us, because there is that acknowledgement that health is central to family and child well-being. So in terms of engaging, I think it's just a process of asking, as Sam mentioned.
I know there's a long way to go though, because health has a bureaucracy. It's from the top down, whereas all of this is driven from the bottom up.
Well, that's a really interesting point, and we're working with the state government, not federally, and we've taken a dual approach in that it's top down and it's bottom up. So we've worked our way from the top level of government in terms of that endorsement and desire to trial this new way of working, and it is a trial. We've talked very much about the fact that we want this to be very, very much under the radar, hopefully years, until we've actually started to demonstrate that it's having an impact and we've learned how to make it work. Ross is so much further down the track, and it's wonderful to hear what's happening there in terms of pathways. But I think what we've done is acknowledged, just from, again, learnings from the US and Canada, that it's quite critical to success to have government at the table, because government are so fundamental to the service delivery system, and I guess the whole ecosystem are so sort of ingrained and involved in every aspect of service delivery within a vulnerable community. So we really are cascading down now through the levels of government. So we've now gone to the regional leadership group, which is across all departments, so including health, and all of those leaders, those district directors, have signed off on the project. And the ask has not been for any financial support. The ask has been for, political support and endorsement and data. So those are the two asks of government, and we're now at the local level talking to hospital staff, talking to community nurses. That's on the health side, and that same process is being followed down on the education side. So now we're talking to the director of schools, and we're now getting down into the school principals level in terms of community engagement. So you're absolutely right that it's fundamental that health are involved at the absolute grassroots level. But again, I guess the requirement would be that those health workers need to opt in to the program as well, and being part of a sort of a shared governance structure and being a part of the process. You know, it's very much inclusive.
I'd just like to make an observation as well. Health are always trying to engage with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, and I can see this model is really great because it turns health on its head really, because it's from the bottom up, and it's about engagement with communities as well, and so that's something that's always been historically lacking from the government side.
The one other issue to point out is, though, even though it is from the bottom up, it has to be supported from the top down. That, yeah. And not just purse strings, but if the organisational structures don't support that type of work from the bottom, then you're doomed to fail.
And I think we've had some pretty good experience in the Stronger Families Alliance of getting ourselves from the ground up to a certain level and then whacking our head on the system ceiling. But also it's apparent now that there is change coming with other sorts of structural changes that are happening above. So it is always that back and forth, collision, I think, is probably what has happened in our experience. Now, Beth, did you have a question?
1020 I know has 10 years of funding, and how are you building sustainability into the program, and if so, how are you doing that, and how would you recommend for other organisations? Because Kate also mentioned that is an issue where we have funding and it's a finite period of time, and unfortunately good funding doesn't always continue. So yeah, what's your suggestion around building sustainability into the projects that you're funded to do?
I was just saying, I think Kate is equally as qualified to answer that, and obviously it's a critical question, and this is reflective, I guess, from our sense of obligation that we need to be able to commit to 10 years, which is why we've really ring-fenced the number of communities that we can afford to support, because we really don't want to be in a position where we aren't providing sustainability into the backbone. But I think it's worth mentioning before I hand over to Kate, because I'm sure you've got much experience here too. But speaking to Liz Weaver from the Tamarack Institute, it was quite a revelation actually that they're not huge numbers. The Promised Neighbourhoods Institute model, I think, is a more expensive model on balance to run. There's a great deal more central infrastructure that's provided by the Promised Neighbourhoods Institute out into the 22 communities that they support. But the Tamarack Institute, which is perhaps more in line with the Australian context, it's running a little bit on the smell of an oily rag. So they really only fund the backbone capacity, the individual who is funded to provide that support in community, and a couple of other key supports. We're not talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I think it's quite important for the community to really be clear about how much they can draw on from existing services from people around the table, so that you do have a good sense of what the number is that you need to fundraise for to ensure that you do have sustainability in the longer term. Community funds are another. I mean, there's a whole other conversation around funding models that we haven't touched on today, but there's a lot of work that we can do there. Anyone else have any issue?
Yes, and also part of sustainability and plans are, I think, as Sam just touched on, not necessarily always finding more money, but thinking about different ways of using the resources that you have available. But also, I think in terms of sustainability, another thing that we have to think about is not just the resources or the funding, but making sure we have practices or processes in place for handing on leadership, because as people change, they need to be replaced as well. We don't want to lose ground as that sort of thing happens. So I think we have to examine sustainability on a number of levels.
Okay. I'm going to bring it back much smaller. Sam, in your talk, you talked about children thriving and being ready to thrive when they got to school. And I'm stuck on that definition of thrive, because that's forever changing, and I see a real shift in children being children and the importance of play, and that shift from school readiness and being already knowing ABCs and 1, 2, 3 and things like that. How in a project that's 10 years or the Pathways project, does that definition change with communities having different expectations even in such a short space of time?
What a great question. I don't think it's 3 minutes worth though, but we'll try in 3 minutes.
And I feel like I should hand this to you, Di, actually, to answer this. And it's such a great question. And I guess it's reflective of, there are so many different ways to measure this. How long's a piece of string? And there are so many different data points that we could be using. And rightly or wrongly, we've sort of put a stake in the ground around essentially it's the ADI data on vulnerability, so developmentally vulnerable on one or more domains, which is that 22% of children. But you're right that I think you do need a context for being able to thrive. But I guess it's challenging because we know through programs like Peri Preschool and the other longitudinal evidence-based programs that there are some sort of basic fundamentals that need to be met to allow children to progress and thrive, I guess, in a traditional education system that there's rightly or wrongly where all children currently end up. It's a universal service. So we do have to, I guess, pick something that we anchor ourselves to in terms of what's the minimum that all children must have to enable them to reach their full potential.
And I guess just very, very quickly, that's why we focus in Pathways and what we're doing is not just Pathways, but where we're going since Pathways on children's social and emotional wellbeing, because that's fundamental to so many aspects. Engagement, attachment to school, good social relationships with other people, kids as well as adults. So those are skills for life, not just learning.
Thank you. I'm going to wind it up there, even though I will bite my tongue. I would like to respond to that, but I won't. Who has a question for one of our panellists?
Wait, that's it.
Wait.
I'm just going to commit a cardinal sin and make a statement.
Oh no.
Thank you for your acknowledgement about how I've led the Alliance today, but I did want to say that what it looks like to me, that when I look at the way that we're working in the Blue Mountains, I see something very complex. And the nature of that is that we're all a little bit like blind men with our hands on the elephant, seeing different things. And so when I look out from where I sit, I see a whole lot of other leaders. And we talk about things every day, and we're throwing this ball around about who will lead what when, and it just keeps getting thrown around. It's my job to get up and do that bit, and it's my job to send out the minutes and hold the vision and say it, but that's just one role about what the leadership is. So I just wanted to underline that point because I feel like it won't work unless it's a co-led, collaborative type venture, which is why I feel things have worked in the mountains for us.
Thanks, Tanya. I'd reiterate that, but I'd also reiterate Mary's point of succession planning for somebody who's actually the glue to this, because it really, call it a backbone organisation, call it what you like. In the CREATE model, I think it's a community collaborator, is that what you're calling officer? It's somebody who holds the ball and then throws it around and other people catch it and run the way they need to. So very good comment and really good stuff for us to think about as we go forward. Anybody else with a question for us? Peter over there, thanks.
Thank you, Di. And good morning, everybody. We've had a fantastic morning with so much information and on a very important topic. We talk about systems. We've had a very good session just now on leadership, the importance of leadership, and how it's critical that leaders facilitate change. And there really is nobody who's done a more magnificent job than what Tanya's done, as has already been acknowledged. But what is involved? Systems are homeostatic mechanisms. That means they're self-correcting. They're very hard to change. Try and change any government system. But it's all about understanding and getting people on side, getting that commitment and ownership. And you do that through the sort of process that Tanya has taken all of us, those on the Stronger Family Alliance, through over the last, 8 years, something like that. I heard one thing this morning that I really have to correct, and I'm sorry, Fiona. When we talk about how we deal with affecting change, if you're going to go through and do something different, and you're going to design something, for heaven's sake, don't think about designing anything until you've had a really good look at what's out there, finding out all about what the subject is you're dealing with, making sense of it, then you start talking about designing, not before. I say that because Fiona touched a chord with me. I've spent 20 years of my life working in international development, perhaps at a higher level, at a much higher scale where hundreds of millions of dollars were involved on most projects. And I can assure you I have seen hundreds of millions of dollars of international taxpayers' money wasted because people the experts did not find out and make sense of the situation they were trying to change before they designed something. They came in, experts flown in with their set views which preempted everything. They looked for the information they wanted to find. They didn't look at what was needed on the ground. Consequence, no commitment, no ownership from the people in the countries where the development was to take place, who then failed the whole project. And I can give you countless examples. So please, when you're going to design something, make sure you've got all the information and that you make sense of it and you involve as much of the stakeholders as possible, or at least representatives of each stakeholder group, because it's only when you get all those people on side that you will bring about change. Thank you.
Is this one? Thank you, Peter. I was just going to respond by saying I probably didn't explain our loop so well, but it's an explicit part of our design to do that work first. So our step is in that set of things we did. I had something there which we've called learning from the past, learning from analysis, learning from collective wisdom. And that is really about bringing together absolutely everyone who's already working in it, all the evidence we can find, doing all that first. I think my point around the evidence was it's not sufficient on its own. So it's really mapping the system, what's the current state of play, and then from there, what's your intervention point? So you can't actually design a prototype or an intervention until you understand the system and the state of play. So I absolutely agree with you, and that's a really important part of our process.
Before I didn't actually say who I am, I'm Louisa Mackay. I work for FAMS, which is a peak body for family support services in New South Wales, and RLG Australia. And we do RBA training, and Mark Friedman developed the results-based accountability framework. Now the question is, in Mark's book, he actually developed that framework based on excellent work that was happening in communities, where communities actually got together to work collectively to impact change, and he actually provides some examples of how that's happened. They didn't actually follow a framework, they just got together and they determined, yes, we want to actually make a change, and collectively they made that happen. My question to the panel is, can you give an example of in Australia where we've actually turned the curve and had improvement in terms of the well-being of communities?
Well, I guess it depends on what you mean. I'm just stuck on well-being of communities. We certainly have been able to demonstrate the improved well-being of children and families through the work that we've been doing. And as Ross said, even though we haven't published widely on this yet, we've got 10 years worth of data that we're continuing to delve into, because we have a very wide range of patterns of participating in the different things, so there's no one outcome. There's many, many outcomes.
Can I just respond to that? I suppose when I say well-being, I also think it's really important to focus on certain indicators in communities, and so teenage pregnancies, for example, is an example in Mark's book. That's something that happened within a community. I actually think if you look at the AEDI, like I think Mary talked about Families New South Wales, you know, being the best thing since sliced bread. But if you have a look at, say, North St Mary's and the AEDI there has been improvement. It's only small, and I'm not saying Families New South Wales was, you know, the key answer to that, but that's what collective impact's about. It's about contribution. But so we have seen some improvement, and even though we've got a long way to go, I just think it's also good if we can actually look at where we are doing things well and be able to share that as evidence.
Yep, I would agree, because I think a lot of what we're talking about are long-range goals, so it's important to have those indicator milestones along the way before you reach the overall benchmark or moving the needle or whatever. So that is critical, because not only is it critical to celebrate the success and recognise, you know, what's been done well, it's also a mechanism for keeping honest and seeing, is there some sort of self-correction you can do along the way to make sure that you move, you know, in those right directions.
And I just wanted to add, actually, that there are a number of these initiatives. You know, the Stronger Families Alliance is an absolute standout in terms of, you know, how much has been achieved over time. I think and Desert Knowledge is another great example. Children's Ground is another great example. You know, I don't know as much about the work happening in Victoria, but people are increasingly, Benalla obviously is another standout example, and Go Goldfields I'm increasingly hearing more and more about. So I do think there are, you know, it's wonderful to see an increasing number just an increasing awareness, I guess, of this work that's been happening in community for a long time. So I think I actually was reflecting on my own content today, and really I'm pleased this opportunity's come up for me to clarify that I actually think Australia's developing some incredible some really incredible initiatives at a local level, and I think the challenge for us is how do we create that at scale now? So the Stronger Families Alliance, how do we learn what's happened there and take that to scale in other communities where there's a focus on vulnerable children and families? And I think we know that we can do it. We've got the evidence, and Desert Knowledge have got the most fabulous data in 3 communities now in terms of how they've applied a really rigorous shared measurement system to their work, and they are tracking, and it really is population level change that they're achieving there. The issue is that it's just in 3 sites, you know, and obviously the need is much greater than that.
I'm not well placed to talk about scale projects or rather evaluation and measurement, but I am well placed to talk about great projects in Western Sydney, of which there are innumerable local partnerships, individuals who excel in leadership that have made a difference. And I hope you know, or people may know, we have an annual Zest Awards to recognise and reward great community work across Western Sydney in a whole range of categories. And so your question, Louisa, is a great segue into, there's a flyer on your table, we have an annual award ceremony, and we have over 100 nominations for those awards each year. And this year we're also having a forum to unpack some of those great projects and people to talk about them. And so on the 9th of September, love to see lots of you there to hear about some of those things.
Sorry, I'll just make one quick other point is just on, and I'm glad Sam mentioned, because I forgot, that actually what we're doing is trying to build capacity to go to scale. As Ross mentioned, what we're working on in a 2-year period is actually the first stage of a 10-year, ambition, and the next stage will be going up. And as Ross has also mentioned, we're working through communities for children, but it's not restricted. There may be 52 communities for children sites across Australia, but there are also, thousands of other communities which these capacity building processes would be equally appropriate to. And thank you for raising that point, because it's very important.
Thanks, Kate. Just before I hand over to Alan now, I think this has been a great panel session, and I think I've really enjoyed it. I hope you all have. Would you join me in thanking the panellists again? Thanks.